Imagine you are a survival expert. You have been preparing for this for years, you know the mountain like the back of your hand, and you have the necessary equipment to brave any storm. You are inside your tent, trying to rest, when suddenly something happens. It is not an outside noise, it is not an animal. It is something so terrifying, so invasive, that you don't even have time to put on your boots. Your only reaction, and that of your entire group, is to grab a knife, slash the tent fabric from the inside, and plunge, barefoot and in your underwear, into certain death by freezing at 30 degrees below zero. What could be so horrific that you would prefer to freeze to death in the dark rather than stay under that roof for one more second? This is not the beginning of a horror movie. This is what 9 young Russian students lived through in the early morning hours of February 2, 1959, in the Ural Mountains. When rescuers found the campsite, they stumbled upon a scene that defied all scientific logic. The tent slashed wide open, the footprints of 9 people walking away, and an absolute silence on the mountain of the death. What they discovered later, in the bodies of the victims, was the beginning of a labyrinth of secrets that the Soviet authorities tried to bury forever. Massive internal injuries that seemed caused by a brutal impact, traces of radioactivity on their clothes, and an investigation closure that preferred silence over the truth. Today, more than 6 decades later, we are still unearthing what that supposed irresistible force of nature was that ended the lives of these 9 experts, and why the state pulled every string to ensure we would never know what truly happened in that pass. To understand the magnitude of this tragedy, one must understand who the protagonists were. Igor Dyatlov, a 23-year-old engineering student, led a group of 9 people, all of them experienced mountaineers from the Ural Polytechnic Institute. They were no amateurs. They possessed impeccable technical training and were embarking on a Category 3 expedition, the most difficult and demanding of the era, to obtain their definitive certification. They ventured into the northern Urals with the goal of reaching Mount Otorten, a route that implied traversing wild terrains and unpredictable weather conditions. Nothing in their training or their gear, which included precise maps, compasses, and sufficient supplies, suggested they could end up succumbing to an emergency of such magnitude. The expedition proceeded normally until February 1, 1959, when the group decided to set up camp on the slope of Mount Kholat Syakhl. It was at that point, under the cover of darkness, where history changed forever. According to subsequent investigations, at some point in the early morning of February 2, a traumatic event occurred that forced the group to abandon the safety of their tent. Rescuers, who arrived weeks later due to the lack of news, found the tent buried under a layer of snow, torn from the inside out with sharp instruments. The scene was chaotic, yet it revealed absolute determination to escape. What was most baffling was the trail of footprints leading away from the tent. The hikers did not flee in a frenzy of disorganized, scattered panic, but instead walked away together, descending as a group toward the tree line, located 1.5 kilometers away. Upon reaching the edge of the forest, beneath a large cedar tree, the remains of a campfire were found alongside the bodies of the first 2 members of the group, Yuri Krivonischenko and Yuri Doroshenko, who were wearing barely anything but underwear. A few meters away, between the cedar and the tent, 3 more bodies were located, including that of the leader, Igor Dyatlov. They were positioned in ways that suggested an attempt to return to the camp. However, it was not until the arrival of spring and the subsequent thaw months later that the rest of the members were discovered in a deep ravine. These last bodies presented the most horrific and enigmatic injuries. Multiple rib fractures and massive cranial damage that would have required a colossal impact force, comparable to being struck by a heavy vehicle. What was most disturbing to the forensic pathologists was that the internal thoracic bones were shattered by a massive pressure that bore no proportion to the superficial contusions and lacerations on their skin, a fact that defies any conventional forensic explanation. The mystery darkened even further due to the response of the Soviet authorities. During the autopsy, unusual levels of radiation were detected on the clothing of some of the deceased. Although it is known today that 2 of them worked in nuclear facilities in the region and could have contaminated their clothes previously, at the time, this detail was deliberately silenced. The prosecutor in charge, Lev Ivanov, closed the case in May 1959, ruling that the deaths were caused by an irresistible natural force. This vague conclusion prevented a thorough investigation and left an information vacuum that has been filled for years by theories ranging from secret military tests, such as missile launches that would have triggered shockwaves, to chemical experiments that would have forced the youth to flee due to environmental toxicity. The government ban on accessing the mountain area for years only served to solidify the suspicion that the state was protecting high-security secrets at the expense of the hikers' lives. Despite the passing years, the Dyatlov Pass remains a jigsaw puzzle where science and hidden history intertwine in an enigma that, much like the secrets of the ice, seems unwilling to be fully revealed. Modern research, far from closing the case, has opened new rifts in this story. For decades, the theory of the irresistible natural force was ridiculed, but advancements in computer simulation technology have allowed researchers and scientists to analyze the mountain's dynamics from perspectives that were previously impossible. Some experts have proposed that a slab avalanche, a specific phenomenon where a block of compact, dense snow suddenly breaks away due to terrain instability, could have been directly responsible for the horror. According to this hypothesis, the snow would have fallen with a massive mechanical force onto the tent while the youth slept, causing those catastrophic internal injuries by compressing their bodies against the rigid floor of the tent. This would explain why the bones suffered such severe damage without the outer layer of the skin showing the massive bruising typical of a direct impact out in the open. Nevertheless, this explanation, as technical as it may be, still clashes with the darkest elements of the case. Physics may attempt to justify an avalanche, but it falls short of fully explaining the enigmas surrounding the clothing and the subsequent flight. Furthermore, the mystery of the youth's behavior upon leaving the tent persists. If an avalanche had struck them and injured them so severely, it remains baffling how they managed to coordinate in the dark to descend the slope together, and why their instinct was not to try to rescue medical tools or recover vital supplies trapped in the tent. The fact that they walked away in formation and attempted to light a fire under such precarious conditions suggests a level of urgency or psychological terror that a simple storm or a common snow phenomenon does not seem to justify on its own. The role of the Soviet state adds another layer of deep distrust. Not only was an administrative silence imposed for years, but the burial of the bodies and the management of information given to the families were carried out with an urgency that borders on suspicious. Many researchers who have reviewed the case in recent times agree that the speed with which everything was shelved and the absolute restriction on accessing Mount Kholat Syakhl were measures designed to protect the integrity of nearby military installations, many of which remained active in the Ural region at the height of the Cold War. This intersection between an inexplicable human tragedy and the opacity of an implacable political machine is what has turned the Dyatlov Pass into a dark legend. In the end, the story leaves us before a mirror that reflects our own doubts about the truth. As the years pass and the pieces trying to fit into this puzzle multiply, the mystery becomes denser, not less. Was it the lethal combination of natural terrain instability and a hostile environment that doomed these 9 students? Or were they victims of a state oversight that preferred to hide a technological disaster rather than acknowledge it? Until new declassified documents emerged to shed light on the military activities in the area back in February 1959, the mountain will keep its secret. Each new generation that approaches the case ends up facing the same thing. A question without a definitive answer that forces us to question what truly happened in the silence of the snow when the world, for those 9 young people, simply ceased to be a safe place. Beyond scientific debates and conspiracy theories, what truly turns the Dyatlov Pass case into an open wound in historical memory is the human component that the official report tried to erase. The expedition was not a secret mission, but an academic project full of future plans. The 9 hikers were not just mountain experts. They had lives, hobbies, and personal bonds that were cut short in the absolute cold of the Urals. Some of them kept route diaries that were recovered by the rescue teams. Reading their final lines, where they describe their excitement for the trip and the beauty of the snowy landscape, creates a brutal contrast with the fate that awaited them just a few hours later. Those diaries record no fear, no forebodings, nor any signs that anything out of the ordinary was occurring, which fuels the thesis that the disaster was sudden and completely unexpected. The government's management of the families was also a turning point that helped the legend grow uncontrollably. During the process of identifying the bodies, they were forbidden from seeing photographs of the findings on the slope, and they were given explicit instructions on how the burials had to be conducted. Many of the families were informed that the deaths were accidental, but testimonies from those who washed the bodies for the funerals mentioned details about strange skin colors, orange or brown tones. Although modern forensic science explains today that this coloration is a natural result of severe freezing combined with weeks of exposure to high-altitude mountain sun and cold mummification processes, at the time, the dissonance between what the state said and what the parents and siblings of the victims saw generated a current of mistrust. Even decades after the fall of the Soviet Union, this remains the primary driver behind the private investigations that continue to be carried out today. Even nowadays, with modern expeditions attempting to recreate the route using GPS technology, thermal cameras, and drones, Mount Kholat Syakhl seems to resist being explained. Every team that attempts to replicate the camp under the same weather conditions returns with the same sense of unease. Mountain climatology experts point out that the way the wind interacts with the topography of the terrain on that specific slope generates low-frequency sounds, infrasound, which, although not consciously perceived by the human ear, can induce states of anxiety, paranoia, and sudden panic attacks in human beings. Some researchers propose that this could be the key. It was not a physical force, but a meteorological condition that, added to the extreme isolation, fractured the psychological stability of the group and forced them to abandon their only protection. Regardless of whether the cause was a snow slab, a failed military experiment, or a collective psychological reaction triggered by the environment, the legacy of Dyatlov reminds us that human beings, no matter how prepared and technological, remain fragile entities when encountering the unknown. The story is not just about what killed 9 young people, but about how that tragedy became a metaphor for the 20th century. An era where the human ambition to conquer the elements clashed brutally against the secrets that great powers hid beneath the ice. until a piece of evidence appears to explain, point by point, the strange circumstances, the internal injuries, and the coordinated flight from the tent. Dyatlov Pass will remain the place where reason stopped walking and mystery took control. And so, the trail of the tragedy finally leads us to the exclusion zone that, for a long time, operated as the definitive wall against the truth. The fact that the Soviet Union kept this mountain area closed to any civilian for 3 years after the events was not just a precautionary measure against extreme weather or the dangers of the area, but an institutional barrier designed to prevent curious eyes from finding what the state had already decided to hide. That forced isolation allowed rumors to grow unchecked, from legends about attacks by local Mansi tribes, which were quickly dismissed due to the lack of third-party footprints, to theories about the sighting of strange lights in the sky, described by other groups of hikers who were in the vicinity during that same fateful night. The persistence of this enigma has given rise to an independent research industry that remains active today. Each year, new true crime enthusiasts and high mountain experts head to the Urals, armed with technology that the 1959 rescuers could not have even dreamed of, searching for that missing piece to explain how 9 people could die in such radically different ways within the same span of time. What they find, invariably, is a mountain that feels indifferent to our doubts. Kholat Syakhl, in its vast immensity, holds no explanations, only rocks, ice, and a silence that seems to protect itself, a constant reminder that nature, when combined with the mistakes of men, can create scenarios that surpass any capacity for rational analysis. What truly keeps us gripped by this tale is the feeling that, if we unravel Dyatlov Pass, perhaps we will understand a little better that blurry border between what science can explain and what we prefer to ignore out of fear of the implications. If we accept the military thesis, we are assuming that the lives of 9 students were considered acceptable collateral damage for the objectives of a power in the midst of an arms race. If we accept the avalanche or natural phenomenon thesis, we face the anguish of knowing that, even when being the best, nature can wipe us out in a single stroke without leaving a trace or a reason. It is precisely that dilemma, that impossibility of choosing between human malice and the crudeness of fate, that keeps the case alive in our collective imagination. With the passing of decades, declassified documents have revealed cracks in the wall of silence, but none have been wide enough to break through it. We have learned about the tensions of the era, about the pressure prosecutors faced not to discomfort the Ministry of Defense, and about the strange bureaucracy that turned a search for the missing into an exercise in damage control. However, the faces of Igor Dyatlov and his companions, immortalized in the last photographs they took themselves before the night enveloped them, continue to question us. They entered history as students on a routine expedition and left it transformed into an eternal symbol of what happens when power decides that the truth is not necessary for the official narrative. And as long as the wind keeps blowing over the slope of the Mountain of the Death, Dyatlov Pass will not just be a place on the map, but a warning that history, no matter how securely we lock it away, will always find a way to return to us. Ultimately, the most unsettling thing about the Dyatlov case is how the story has become a mirror of our own obsessions. Today's society, marked by immediacy and the need for clear answers, feels frustrated by an event that refuses to fit into a definitive mold. Every time we believe we have found the key, whether it is a technical explanation about the weather, a new document about missile tests, or even theories bordering on science fiction, the reality of what occurred on that slope slips away again, reminding us that not everything in this world is designed to be understood by human logic. The mountain owes us no explanations, and the 9 students, in their final silence, have become the involuntary guardians of a secret that, the more time passes, the less it seems to belong to this world. The tragedy has transcended its geographical origin to integrate into the global culture of mystery. What began as a police report full of cross-outs and contradictions has transformed into a phenomenon that inspires cinema, literature, and constant forensic analysis, where each new participant in the debate brings a piece that seems to fit perfectly until it is analyzed under the light of the other known facts. How can a slab avalanche explain all the factors? How can a military experiment explain the lack of massive external marks on bodies fractured by such immense pressures? It is this crossroads between the explainable and the absurd that prevents the case from being permanently archived in the annals of history. Perhaps the greatest value we can extract from this narrative is not the resolution of the puzzle, but the capacity to keep the memory of those young people alive. Igor, Ludmila, Semyon, and the rest of the group are not just variables in a mystery equation. They were people with aspirations, friends who fully trusted their leader, and companions who shared a final dinner before facing a fate that no one could have foreseen. Keeping interest in their story alive is, in a way, a form of justice against the institutional machinery that, 60 years ago, tried to ensure they were forgotten as quickly as possible. As long as we keep speaking of them, the attempt to hide their truth will have failed. Today, when we look at the photographs recovered from that expedition, the smiling faces, the tent pitched in the snow, the camaraderie of an adventure that promised to be unforgettable, we are invaded by the very same doubts that assaulted the first rescuers who climbed the mountain. It is the impossibility of closing the circle that forces us back to the same point time and time again. Dyatlov Pass reminds us that, despite our maps, our technology, and our belief in the superiority of reason, There are corners in history and in the world where the unpredictable still has the final word, and where the silence of the ice will always be deeper than any of our theories. As we close this journey through Dyatlov Pass, what endures is not just the coldness of statistics or the uncertainty of forensic reports, but the persistence of a question that refuses to find an answer. Through the decades, every attempt to shed light on what happened has been met by the same unyielding mountain and by an archive of history that, far from clearing up, seems to have become more complex over time. The tragedy of these 9 students has consolidated itself as a benchmark of how fate can, at times, be a brutal intersection between human fragility and the immensity of the inexplicable. The lesson this case leaves us is that our search for answers, however tenacious, is always limited by the boundaries of what was once buried. Not only by the ice and snow of the Urals, but by the interests of an era that valued the stability of its secrets more than the peace of the affected families. It is likely that, as the world continues to evolve and develop new technical capabilities to explore our past, Dyatlov Pass will remain a testing ground for our theories, a constant reference in popular culture, and a cornerstone for those who argue that, at the heart of the official history, there is always a margin where the truth is distorted. In the end, Igor Dyatlov and his team achieved something they perhaps did not plan when they began their expedition. They became an enigma that defies oblivion. Their story forces us to look squarely at our own vulnerability and the capacity of power structures to shape the memory of what occurred in the darkness of a Siberian night. Beyond the morbidity or the fascination with true crime, there exists a solemn respect toward what that group represents. They were young people who, in the prime of their lives, faced an end for which no one could have prepared, and their memory endures in the collective effort of those who refuse to close the case without having found a truth that satisfies reason. The silence of Kholat Syakhl is no longer just the emptiness of a desolate mountain, but a monument to mystery, a reminder that, even in the era of absolute information, there are corners where facts prefer to remain hidden. And so, with the echo of their names resonating in every new investigation, the story of Dyatlov Pass will continue its course, eternal and unresolved, inviting us all to keep searching for a piece that, quite possibly, was lost in the winter of 1959.